Home, the South African economy contracted more than expected in the first quarter. The gross domestic product fell by 3.2% in the quarter. This is the largest quarterly drop in a decade.
The three largest negative contributors
for example, which is highly dependent on electricity and has seen negative growth as well as negative contribution to the decline that we have seen in the first quarter. And there's no doubt electricity has contributed to this decline.
Economist Ian Cruikshanks believes South Africa could be heading towards a recession. Gross fixed capital formation representing investments by businesses has declined. Cruikshanks says the country is not seen as an attractive investment destination. He says to blame is the policy uncertainty and higher cost of electricity and supply challenges. The situation spells less jobs being created and even less tax revenue and a deterioration in government finances.
If we spend more than we earn, the bank manager is going to call us in and say, sorry, no more credit for you. You know, that is where we could, the country itself could find itself. We could then see that we move towards a lower investment grading, credit rating for the country as a whole, and then what capital we are able to raise will be at a higher rate and more difficult to access. So a heck of a lot is running on this, and it is really important that government sees their way clear to changing policies to be more investment friendly, and that way we'll find the investors of the world will want to commit their capital to the country for growth potential.
Some economists say the disappointing GDP figures call for a cut in interest rates to boost the economy, given that inflation is well within the Reserve Bank's target bracket. Others say it is time for government to move with speed to address the structural issues hindering growth. SABC News, Johannesburg.
And to talk more on the state of the local economy and the rate of unemployment in the country, I'm now joined in studio by Professor Raymond Parsons from the Northwest University Business School and the Deputy General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, Moleko, Phakedi. Gentlemen, good evening to you and welcome.
Good evening.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Professor, I'm going to start with you. What do you attribute the decline to?
Well, as you've indicated, we found it's a much bigger decline than was expected. So the shock lies rather in the extent of the decline rather than a decline was not expected in the growth rate in the first quarter. And I think the two major factors that were underestimated but were at play in the first quarter were firstly, of course, the load shedding by Eskom, which was a great shock to the economy then, and especially small business. And the second was the issue of policy uncertainty. Not a new issue, but I think as we got closer to the election, so it became more prominent. So I think the two major pillars on which this decline rested were really then in the first instance the shock of the load shedding, and secondly the policy uncertainty, which was discouraging to investors.
So how big of an impact did load shedding have on the decline?
It's difficult to quantify, but I think the numbers speak for themselves in the sense that all along it was felt that the dominant Eskom monopoly, if that went wrong and the lights went out, that would have a major effect on the economy. In fact, you could look at other good things for our economy, but if you can't keep the lights on, you can't make them happen. And so I think that was probably the major single factor, even if it's not possible to put an exact number to it.
You're right. DSG, what's SAFTU's position on the latest figures?
Firstly, is government's failure to bring about necessary drastic changes. We cannot continue with the same set of policy trajectory that have led us to this. We need boldness. We need to break away with the apartheid economic structure and system. We need to do away with the colonial economic structure that is still trapped the South African economy. Hence, we don't have growth. So far as we are concerned, this does not necessarily shock us. It demonstrates that the ANC government is not willing to break up with the past and perpetuate an economic system that continues to disempower and put a lot of our people into a poverty of a high proportional level. You would appreciate that the current economic system, even if you were to go back to the time when there was growth under Thabo Mbeki, little was done towards redistribution, job creation. And as a result thereof, you cannot in any way continue with the same set of policies that you would think will bring about the necessary change. It won't. I accept what the Prof is saying about the question of electricity, but that is also a self-designed tragedy. I mean, we knew long ago that ESCOM was being ravaged by a high level of mismanagement, maladministration, corruption, sudden changes of ministers, changes of CEO. What else did we expect? It's a self-made crisis as far as we are concerned, and there is a need for a serious, bold step to be taken. The unfortunate case is that it's the workers and the working class that are going to suffer the effects of this doing. We are just coming from election.
Before we get to that, into the ripple effects of the implications of this decline, when you say that the government failed to implement the necessary changes, what changes are these?
Now let's look at the finance, mineral, energy complex as it is. Little has been done in that regard. So far as we are concerned, our government is supposed to have long nationalized the mining industry, long brought about the beneficiation, which is not the case. Our extraction sector continues to export our raw minerals and bring about finished good at a high price. That cannot be correct. That cannot be sustainable. We're exporting jobs. And little have been done by the ANC government in addressing, firstly, that particular aspect. And as a result thereof, it goes without saying, we are heavily dependent on the finance sector. And that does not necessarily give about lasting jobs. It gives jobs that you may not necessarily have a situation where you can depend on and build the economy and make sure that you absorb as much as you can in terms of those who are, who are looking for jobs. As a result thereof, little have been done to be frank, to bring about the necessary change in our economic structure.
Well, President Ramaphosa had, come up with the Jobs Summit and, of course, the Investment Summit in the past years. I mean, we've seen so many pledges, billions of rands being pledged towards job creation. So the government is seen to be doing something. So when you're blaming the government, what do you mean by this?
Now we can continue with the endless talk show. Remember the Nazareth ANC conference? We said something as such. We said the 5 days that they spent there, they were discussing whether this is a garden tool, a fork or a spade. That didn't bring about any changes that would have given the ANC government the latitude to bring about the necessary change. For self to say, we have rejected firstly the job summit. We have long said that job summit will not give any meaningful result. We are quite clear about the investment summit. That
Why
was
though?
just
What makes you say that it won't bring any meaningful result?
Little have changed. Let's look at what have happened since the job summit. Let's look at what have changed since the investment summit. Little have changed. The capitalists in this South African system are actually on strike. They are not investing. So what needs to then change? You have the president of the country that takes a bow and goes around the whole world begging. It's not necessary. Deal with illicit cash outflow. That on its own will bring about the necessary capital that is necessary to bring about investment, job creation, and even stimulate economic growth.
I wonder if I could just come in here,
please
because
come in, Prof.
I think that my comrade here has made some important points, which I can actually share, because I think both of us want a bigger, stronger and better economy which will create more jobs and have more transformation. But in what he has said, I think one of the most important points that has occurred to me when we talk about this bad growth performance, and it is the accumulation over a period. It didn't happen in the first quarter of this year. Right. This was an accident waiting to happen, given some of the factors. But when we look at the plans that have been announced, I think the challenge is not that there hasn't been a series of plans. The problem has been that the plans have not been implemented. They have not been implemented. Going back to the Reconstruction and Development Plan, I can cite them all, we don't have time, as GISA, the New Development Plan, the National Development Plan. Bits are implemented, yet they are urgent. They are urgent for transformation, job creation and growth. Now you ask yourself over time, the cumulative effect then is eventually this economy winds down, it doesn't generate the growth and the jobs that it should, and then you end up with where you are now.
And just picking up on that point, Professor, I mean, economists had actually cautioned the GDP growth would fall in this quarter. So did you get the feeling or the sense that there were contingency measures being put in place by the government to cushion this drop?
Well, there was an economic stimulus announced some months ago. You've mentioned, I'm talking just about the more recent efforts. There was an investment summit, very successful. There was a job summit. I happened to look at the summary of the decisions taken, 42 decisions taken in October last year. Now, I know we've had an election, and that's distracting. I doubt how many of them have been implemented, but we keep hearing some of them again. Like in there is money already dedicated for infrastructure, but we don't get the projects off the ground.
Yeah.
The result is you don't create the jobs. There is a low-hanging fruit. Then there's the issue, we thrive on tourism. We have a comparative global advantage. This program is called The Globe. So let me say, it's a global advantage we have. We're not exploiting it to the maximum, but what do? We go on with visa requirements, which are extremely discouraging. And the problem is, when you've discouraged a tourist, even if you then say, oh, well, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I might amend it, they don't come back immediately. They've already gone somewhere else. So we must try to get more things right the first time. That means that post-election, with a new cabinet, with a willingness to look afresh at things, we've got to understand that what these numbers are telling us is we have to hit the ground running.
Indeed.
And make the point I've made more than before, which I think that my comrade shares. If we could factor talking into our growth rate, we wouldn't be sitting here having a problem.
I mean, the downward spiral reflected by household spending data, do you get the feeling that South Africans perhaps are not putting much into the economy?
No, the problem is that the consumer, apart from investor confidence, where that has been damaged, and our president has committed himself to strengthening it. And you do that by creating the right policy environment, creating the right incentives.
Yeah.
As far as the consumer is concerned, they are being heavily squeezed, whether it's by inflation or taxation or whatever it may be. Now you have a carbon tax, which I'd wished we could have postponed, because I can't imagine a worse time to be putting up the fuel price because you have to introduce this carbon tax.
Sure.
But that's a question of timing. I think the important issue is that the consumer too has suffered from uncertainty, from unemployment. Will I have a job? Can I spend? So I think both on the investment side and on the consumer side, we now at a fork in the road to rebuild confidence so that we can turn this economy around, get away from the negative growth rates, and unlock our true potential.
Okay.
We could grow at 3%, 4%, and 5%, 6% over time, provided we have the right policies, the right attitudes, and the right commitments by business, government, and labour.
Picking up on that point, Mr. Phakedi, earlier on he mentioned policy uncertainty as one of the catalysts for the
coming up with a new plan. We accept that we need a development plan, but we need a new plan that will bring about realization of our own national development agenda. Currently, that plan is not delivering, and it won't deliver. That is why, so far as we are concerned,
what would that new plan do differently from the NDP?
Pardon me?
What would that new plan that you're talking about do differently than the NDP? It
should be a holistic program. So far as we are concerned, it should trace back to what the Freedom Charter's desires or aspirations were in terms of the economy. I mean, the question of nationalization goes without saying. That's one particular issue. We were quite strong that will bring about the necessary change. If you look at what has been happening in terms of the state-owned enterprise and the public sector, you would appreciate that government has been shooting itself on its foot. Because so far as we are concerned, state-owned enterprise could play a very important role in bringing about economic growth, in bringing about job creation. Secondly, if you have looked at what has been happening within the public sector, there have been a number of, so far as we are concerned, a number of misleading statements from government and government leaders to say it's bloated. And if you look into what exactly the state of the public sector is, you would appreciate that public sector was supposed to be given the necessary space to bring about creation of employment. It can absorb more people into employment. It can bring about quality service. There's been too much preoccupation about, Prophet, I must say this, public-private partnership. Interests are not the same. Once you bring in private sector, it's about profit. It's about maximization of profit. And as a result thereof, you are bound to change certain mandate, you're bound to make certain adjustment to accommodate their particular interest. It's not about the public value that you want to bring about and render the necessary quality service as desired.
I think, if I might just come in, I think what's important in this whole debate, we can use big words like capitalism and socialism and communism and nationalization. No, these are big words.
Please give an opportunity.
But I don't want to finish.
Please give an opportunity.
The crisis we are sitting
I'll
with
give
is
an
the
opportunity
crisis
to
of
speak, Mr.
capitalism.
Phakedi.
And if we are going to refute that, it will be quite unfortunate. We are not a socialist South Africa.
Please come in,
and
Professor.
in a socialist situation, we will not be seated with this situation.
We'll come to you
we are
with
quite
regard to
convinced
that.
on that particular
We'll come
I
to you,
would
Mr.
like
Phakedi.
to say that what is the most important ism that South Africa needs now is pragmatism. That's what we need. We need pragmatism which will take what is good and implement it. If we are going to sit around a table for another few years to work out a new plan, I think the problem is we've had too many plans and not enough action. And the President has himself said that under his regime he hopes to be able to take implementation by the scruff of the neck and push it into the future. But that's not going to happen.
So from your analysis, is there a likelihood that we could go into a recession? Negative growth.
Well, if we don't...
Would it start a domino effect?
If we don't implement what we've said for years we will do, then we will continue to stay in a low growth trap. I don't want to use big R words like recession. A low growth trap is bad enough. Because it means with a 0.5%, 1% growth, what can you do? What jobs can you create? We've got to break out of that low growth trap, but we've got to ensure that we take what we know now, what we've committed ourselves to doing over and over again and not done it. And I think that is ground where some consensus can be found between government, labour and business, that the situation is so serious that we now have to rally round and ensure that what we've said we will do, we will implement, so that people watching this program who are unemployed, who are in poverty, can say, we are beginning to see a difference on the ground. Not just what is debated in elitist seminars on TV or elsewhere, but we are going to implement, we are going to hold our cabinet, business and labour accountable for responsible behaviour in order to turn this economy around and create the jobs that we need.
He talks of some consensus that needs to be found, or common ground that needs to be found between government and the labour movement in South Africa. Can that consensus be found?
No, it can be found. It will be a difficult one to find under the current circumstances. I must be honest with you. Look at what is happening to labour. Firstly, we have been meted with a low national minimum wage act. That is literally enslaving the majority of our own people by just enacting a law that says 3,500 rand should be the national minimum wage. Almost all sectors of the economy seems to be pushing workers to that particular point. That's the first thing. The second thing that we need to agree upon if we want to talk about job creation, it must be decent quality jobs. If you look at what is happening to our graduates currently, it's quite pathetic that they move from one employer to the next in this internship. I'm not downplaying the importance of gaining experience, but it's so much abusive, so far as I'm concerned, that a graduate will move from one institute to the other on an internship setup. And least is done to absorb them. That's a particular issue that probably we should come to a point of consensus. But it will be a very difficult consensus. So long as we don't want to agree, and that's the point I want to emphasize, it cannot be correct that we will not be allowed to critique the current system. And we are telling you that the capital in South Africa have benefited since 1994 to date, and they are continuing to benefit. And they benefit at the expense of the poor and the majority of South Africa.
Look
at the state of South African workers and the working class.
It's been quite hard hitting on the government, because you're now blaming the government. You're now accusing the government of being disingenuous, because now the issue of shedding of jobs has now been brought to the fore, according to COSATU. So you are basically accusing the government of being disingenuous.
If I'd like
COSATU itself should not be moaning. They support this. COSATU knew exactly what government policies have been driven. They understand exactly what ANC's line of thought is. However, they have gone to rally and mobilize workers to vote ANC into government. They have participated in ensuring that the national minimum wage is enacted. They have brought about the introduction of a labour law amendment that literally handcuffs workers. And what does that do? It puts workers in a very difficult position to bring to the fore their grievances and demands from this economy, and you have a capitalist setup where employers are literally in a holiday. They are not giving desired increases, even if they can afford it. It's just a matter of the fact that workers don't have the power to bring about the necessary change. I don't blame workers entirely with the exclusion of unions. Unions themselves need to come back now and play their role as trade union, which is to bring about the issues affecting workers at shop floor level and demands that their increases
but I think,
are better off and their condition of employment.
Since we cannot
improved.
reform society overnight anywhere, and certainly not in South Africa, I just want to lift out one point. Take the minimum wage. I spoke about consensus. That went through NEDLAC. That's one of the instruments of consensus building and consensus seeking in South Africa. It went through a very complicated process, both within NEDLAC, and then there was a panel which looked at it, and eventually both government, Labour and business said, this is the outcome. It's a step, like so many other issues, a step on a long journey. It's a step on a journey. So now we have a national minimum wage. It may not be for some people ideal, but many of the things we're going to do will require compromise. A democracy can only thrive if there's compromise. If you insist on being ideological and not pragmatic, then I'm afraid it's not going to be easy to find consensus. So one needs some ideological flexibility combined with pragmatism to say, we have identified some better solutions, but the problem is not necessarily in the solutions, but that some of the better solutions, I come back to my point, have not been implemented in the past, and that has all caught up with us now, and a fresh mandate in the post-election period, not only for the government, but for Labour and for business. It can no longer be business as usual if we want to create the jobs and get the transformation we want. And we're going to have to work together and understand that we are in the same boat. And if we don't recognize that, we will not reach the port of your goodwill and prosperity that we want in the years ahead. And that is the urgent message that comes out of these latest growth numbers.
Mr. Phakedi, I must apologize. I made reference to COSATU having blamed the government for being disingenuous, but it is actually SAFTU who is actually blaming the government for, I mean, after the elections, they're now wanting to push ahead with the job shedding. I mean, what kind of solutions would you offer to the table, I mean, when it comes to, I mean, the other solutions to counter the job cuts in the civil service?
First, let's look at what is the cause of that sudden job losses that are being talked up. For quite some time, Minister of Public Service Administration have been coming quite out clear and say we have bloated staff. This happened during the past Minister Dlodlo's era. It is now happening now under Minister Senzo. It is clear that it's a conscious decision taken by ANC government to reduce the public service. It's not worth it. It's not necessary. Actually, so far as we are concerned as SAFTU, there is a need for more public servants. If you look at the ratio of police to citizens, you look at the ratio of nursing to patients, you look at the ratio of correctional officers to the inmates, it goes without saying that we need more public servants than ever before.
Apparently the wage bill is quite exorbitant.
No,
what alternatives would you offer to counter this?
Compared to what? Because so far as we are concerned, it is not. A country like us, in our view, shouldn't be sitting at where South Africa is sitting in percentage terms, looking at the fact that we have such basic needs, services that should be rendered. I mean, if you look into other countries, particularly if you look into Latin America, it will make sense. If you look into Sweden, you'll have a country where you have a lot of welfare that the state does provide. And it goes without saying that you would have a bigger size of the public sector. In our case, we have not been replacing those who have been leaving the public service through national attrition, or for that matter, be dismissal or resignation. As a result thereof, there is already a shortage there. The Minister of Police is on record saying that there is a shortage there. If you look at the wage bill, and I'm told that actually within the public wage bill, you also have the public office bearers there. And look at their packs compared to what others are earning.
Look,
and if we are talking about cutting that down,
we should be
doing
I just want to add to this, though, in all this, the fact that things have gone wrong, and we've identified what needs to be corrected, and soon, is the issue that state capture and corruption have also diverted resources away from what should have been done. And, you know, I think, once again, this is the huge national agenda we face, and we must use these bad growth numbers to invest in a better growth policy. We must all become what I call abominable growthmen.
Mr. Phakedi and Professor, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Well, that was Raymond Parsons from the Northwest University's Business School and the Deputy General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, Moleko Phakedi. This is the Globe on SABC News. That's it for now.